Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime story, we shall be looking at the 2009 crime of Colin Cheetham. Colin was born in 1948. Little is known about his early years, but it is believed that he was born in Derbyshire, where he remained throughout his life. He worked as a technical director at a textile company, but was forced into early retirement due to ill health. He was suffering from diabetes, arthritis, and high blood pressure. By the age of 60, he was living with his wife Jennifer in squalid conditions in a small house in Ripley, Derbyshire. Their house was filthy, stacked high with food and rubbish. There were plastic bottles abandoned everywhere, many of which were filled with urine. The upstairs floor of the house was so untidy that both Colin and his wife, who had been a virtual recluse for over 20 years, had to sleep downstairs. It was reported that Colin had a compulsive personality with an obsessive attention to detail. He became fanatical about guns and became a member of a local shooting club. These obsessions would soon take a much darker turn when he decided that he needed to plan and execute the perfect murder. He wanted to see how it would feel to shoot another human being. On Thursday, 17th of September 2009, 43-year-old taxi driver Stuart Ludlam was working his shift at MJ Taxis as he had done for the previous 15 years. The firm was based in Wirksworth, a picturesque small town in Derbyshire, and Stuart was well known within the local community. He was a popular, well-respected family man who had been married to his wife Paula for 17 years. They had 3 children together: Jonathan 15, Matthew 12 and 2-year-old Amy. At around 11:40 a.m. on that Thursday, Stuart left the office to pick up a passenger from Cromford railway station in the Peak District. This small unstaffed station was located in a beautiful Grade 2 listed building in a peaceful, secluded location. Unknown to Stuart, it was this peaceful, secluded location that Colin had decided would be the ideal spot to commit his so-called perfect murder. Colin had planned everything in painstaking detail. He decided that in order to get away with his crime, he needed the perfect location. He spent several weeks visiting local railway stations, photographing his potential murder sites from every angle. He studied train timetables to ensure that he had a window of opportunity where no trains would be passing through the station. Colin already had access to a gun that he planned to use to commit the murder, and took measures to ensure that DNA evidence was not left at the scene. However, the most cold-blooded part of his entire plan was to ensure that he had no connection to the victim whatsoever. The murder would be completely random and motiveless, therefore making his detection so much harder. 4 days earlier, on Sunday the 13th of September 2009, Colin purchased a cheap pay-as-you-go mobile phone from a Morrison's supermarket in Derby. As a man with many routines, Colin had a self-imposed rule whereby any purchases of under £10 would be made in cash, and those over £10 had to be paid for using his credit card. The cheap phone was paid for in cash, making it untraceable. Colin used this phone to request a taxi from Cromford railway station on the 17th of September. It was Stuart who responded to this call, and he arrived at the station in his Ford Focus taxi at around midday. As Stuart was sitting in his car waiting for his passenger to arrive, a shot was fired through the rear windscreen which grazed his head. Wondering what was happening, he turned to see Colin standing near the driver's side of his car, pointing a gun directly at him through the driver's window. Colin ordered Stuart out of the car and made him kneel in the boot of his vehicle. Stuart did as he was told, begging for his life. Colin shot him in the head at point-blank range. Stuart died instantly. At 12:40 p.m, just an hour after Stewart had left the taxi office, his body was discovered by a holiday maker by the name of Peter Noble, who immediately informed the police. The area was sealed off, the station closed, a police helicopter and divers all involved in the search for clues. Despite an extensive search, the murder weapon, Stewart's mobile phone and his taxi headset and the mobile phone used to order the taxi were never recovered. Police established that the phone had been purchased and activated on the 13th of September. However, as it was bought with cash, the owner could not be traced. 9 days after the murder, on the 26th of September, a tribute to Stewart was held at the Matlock taxi rank. Hundreds of people, including family, friends and customers, attended. Flowers lined the streets and the taxis were decorated with black and white balloons, which was the colour of Stewart's favourite football team, Derby County. Following a 2-minute silence, all of the cabbies started sounding their horns in memory of Stewart. With a lack of evidence and no motive, the case was proving difficult for those working on it. Stewart paid with his life for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The victim could have been anyone. Police arrested and questioned 12 people, all of whom were released without charge. Eventually, Colin's strict need to follow his own rules proved to be his downfall. In order to activate his pay-as-you-go mobile phone, Colin needed to purchase £5 of credit. Ordinarily, he would have paid for this in cash, as it fell below his £10 rule for cash purchases. However, at the same time as purchasing the credit at the Morrison's petrol station in Derby, he also purchased £20 of fuel. With a total bill of £25, Colin used his bank card to pay for his purchase, which ultimately allowed police to identify him. When the police arrived at his house, they found it in a state of complete disarray. Within the piles of junk, they found gun magazines, along with various weapons and ammunition. They also found numerous pictures of local railway stations, including Cromford, where the murder had been committed. The meticulously planned and executed crime was completely at odds with his chaotic and filthy living conditions. With the help of a criminal profiler who had correctly identified the killer as being someone who was overweight, unwell and reclusive, the police developed an interview strategy. Allowing Colin to feel as if he was in control of the situation, the police found him to be easygoing and talkative. Colin explained that he had taken the pictures of the railway stations because he was making a calendar. Believing himself to be superior to the interviewing officers, Colin even admitted that he was the first to have found Stewart's body, but panicked and fled the scene when he realised that Stewart had been shot in the head. This arrogance allowed police to solidify the case against him. When police arrived at the scene of the crime, Stewart's body was lying in such a way in the car boot that it would have been impossible to see that he had been shot in the head. Only the killer would have known exactly how Stewart had died. Further analysis of evidence found smudge marks on Stewart's car, which had been caused by latex gloves. Latex gloves were found in the glove box of Colin's car. Blood spatters were found on Colin's clothes, and when analysed they were found to belong to Stewart. When presented with all of the evidence against him, Colin's demeanour changed completely. As he realised that he had lost control of the situation, he became increasingly angry and confrontational. On 1st of October 2009, just 2 weeks after the brutal killing of Stewart Ludlam, Colin was charged with murder. Later that month, on the 20th of October 2009, Stewart's funeral took place. Over 300 mourners attended St Helens Church in Darley Dale to pay their respects. Many of the mourners wore Derby County Football Club scarves. At his trial the following year, Colin maintained his innocence. He claimed that 2 men by the names of Stan and Jeff, who he had met in his local pub, the Old Oak in Horsley, had pressured him into lending them one of his guns. However, no one in the local community had ever heard of these 2 men or could provide any evidence to corroborate Colin's version of events. At Nottingham Crown Court on the 29th of June 2010, Colin was unanimously found guilty of Stewart's murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years and was sent to Wakefield High Security Prison in Yorkshire. The criminal profiler who helped devise the interview strategy correctly identified many of the traits of the murderer before Colin had been identified. However, at that time, the profiler believed that the murder was completed by a serial killer. Police do not believe that Colin had completed any previous crimes, but many are convinced that had he not been caught, he would have gone on to murder many more. It has recently been reported that Colin died in the healthcare unit at Wakefield Prison on 1st of May 2020. He was 71 years old. Thanks very much for listening to that story. My thoughts go out to the victim and his family. Rest in peace, Stuart. Please add any comments down below. I recently found out that I've got a couple of corgis that are great fans of true crime. Grenadine and Arlo. They're carefully and lovingly looked after by Rosewater and her partner, and I believe Momo the cat lives there as well, but probably has a busy life evading these two. Thanks very much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst, as a special little fact for you pusters, the disused southbound platform at Cromford railway station is featured on the single cover of the Oasis song Some Might Say. Goodbye.